Hello?
Perfect. Here's our first question. So my question would be near the beginning of the movie. I don't know if it was addressed. What are the incentives for joining the clubs that were mentioned?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? What are the incentives to?
You mentioned near the beginning that there were like corporate clubs or social clubs that near the beginning. So what are the incentives for joining those clubs, for example?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question that I ask myself quite a bit because in a lot of ways, CEOs that subscribe to this movement are not doing it for shareholders. We have so many examples of companies, whether that's Disney or lately Anheuser-Busch or Exxon, that are taking these policies in ways that hurt their shareholders, that hurt the owners of the company, that hurt their stock prices, that alienate customers in many cases. So why do they do this? It's really, it's a bit of a puzzle. So on the one hand, to some extent, CEOs' compensation can be tied to their performance according to these metrics if the board wants them to. So they can be rated by organizations like Standard & Poor's and Morningstar or CEI rating, according to how well they perform according to ESG metrics. It could be that they want to be one of the cool kids and go to Davos and be accepted versus, being a pariah. Or it could be in some cases, there are people that feel that they're absolutely doing the right thing in pursuing these goals, and that these goals, environmental, racial, whatever they may be, are so important that, whatever harm is done to the system or their company or our democracy or our republic, it's worth it because these goals are that important. So I speculate just like you might, but these are some of the answers that I came up with when I asked myself that question.
Okay, that seems reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, my name is Gadai. I had a question about why is it that these corporations were taken over by leftists and other such interests? Why is it that they managed to become so left-leaning and get captured so easily?
Yeah, it's what they call the long march through the institutions. So this movement has its roots in 2005. And this was when the UN basically got together and said, look, we need to get corporations on board with this, with our sustainable development goals, which are basically ESG criteria plus a few other things. It's not enough for governments to go along. We need to get corporates on board with this. So this has really been going on for that long. And from there, it moved through the World Economic Forum and caught on and got to the point that it is today. I think the left has had a longer game. They certainly have been more successful moving through academia, moving through government administration, moving through media and places like this. And they've certainly been a lot more vocal. It's only recently that conservatives are really starting to wake up to these sort of things. And we just recently saw two victories, first-time victories, where conservative shareholders were able to, with JP Morgan Chase and PayPal, get them to do an internal investigation of their policies that might discriminate against conservatives or people of religious faith. Those were the very first time, and the Securities and Exchange Commission greenlighted them. Those were the very first times that conservatives have actually been able to get their motions put to a vote. So I think conservatives are late to the game. They're not as vocal. They're not as well organized, but that may be starting to change.
All right.
All right. This is Jonathan. I have a question. What was it? What steps will we take as people to minimize the threat that our corporations have been doing to our society?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, some of it comes down to personal choice. There's only so much that an individual can do, but it's a question of where you want to put your money, where you want to open accounts in terms of banking, where you might want to invest your money once you start working and you have pension funds and things like that. There are other options of, corporations that may not take political positions. So consumer companies, whether that's the media that you watch or things that you might drink or things that you might, buy and eat and stuff like that, you can make those choices that way. It's also obviously who you vote for, and not just in national elections. There are a lot of actions that are being taken by the states, which were covered in the film. So state attorney generals are starting to bring lawsuits to support things like antitrust laws and civil rights laws that prohibit racial, gender, and religious discrimination in the United States.
Mhm.
So really standing up and enforcing the laws that we've had in this country that have made the country what it is. So it's really kind of a combination of all of those things. But it has to be something that's a little bit more widespread than I would say, what an individual can do, although individuals can make a difference in their personal choices.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. We have one last question. I'm Dr. Nanda. I'm one of the
Two.
faculty advisors. Oh, we have one more? Okay, great. Faculty advisor for this group. So thank you, Mr. Stocklin, for doing this. This is amazing. I thank Epoch Times for even allowing us to have this viewing. That was awesome. Question or statement. Maybe you can give us clues on corporations that are not woke. You've got this great list here of the ones that maybe we have to be careful of, but maybe a sequel to show that maybe there's some groups out there that are on the same page. That's just an idea. Okay, it's not a question, just more of a do something.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think those sort of databases need to be created. At the moment, it might be a fairly short list, but I think there are a lot of companies that they just don't want to be political. They just want to stay out of this.
Okay,
And
how
I
about
think that's what
apolitical
people.
companies? That would be good too.
Yeah, I think that's what people prefer. We're not looking to create conservative companies. We're looking to get companies to do what they're supposed to do, which is create great products for people, great services, innovate, bring costs down, serve their customers, serve their shareholders.
Yeah.
So, with banking, for example, all of the big Wall Street banks, every brand that you can think of, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Citibank, they are all very much on board with ESG, but you can find a local community bank that just serves the community, and that's what they do.
Okay.
And they don't want to get involved in politics, and they don't have an environmental agenda or a political agenda. So that's one example. Beverage companies, right? We all know about the controversy.
Whatever.
Yeah, but I don't have a view one way or another, but for example, Yingling just came out and said we're not political, and so these are choices that we can make, and unfortunately people don't always have the time to do all this research, but it's a great question, and there should be an organization that compiles these sorts of lists and databases, and I will go and see what I can find there and do an article on it.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Lauren. I was wondering, since you've done your research, have there been any woke corporations that have gone broke?
Well, Silicon Valley Bank is a good example. And there, it was more that they were focused on the wrong things. So their management was very focused on their risks, the bank's risks from climate change and the temperature going up. And I'm not saying that that's not a phenomenon, that that's not a reality, but they had, for example, 3 paragraphs that they dedicated in their annual reports to how they're going to deal with climate risk as a bank. They had a diversity officer on staff. They did not have a risk manager on staff between April of 2022 and January of this year. And so they didn't seem to be all that aware of the interest rate risk that they were running. And so they no longer exist as an independent institution. But for most companies, what we see is that they don't disappear. They just may take a hit in terms of their share price and alienating their customers and things like that. And it is more of a slow descent than something that happens overnight. But we saw with the bank, because there was a run on their assets because their depositors realized how much trouble they were in and how poorly managed they were. They disappeared in a matter of weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much. Thank you guys.
Just
Thank
staying
you.
offside, have you ever heard of the Bank of Dave in Canada?
I haven't. Should I know about
Find out
that?
that movie. You will love it.
Okay, I'll check that out. Thank you.
Dave made a bank.
Okay, I will check that
All
out.
the
Thank you.
people and the people at the top and got it done. Bank of Dave.
Thank you, Dave. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, University of Houston. I'm going to pass it off to Louisiana State University.
Hello. So I'm over in the little conference room. It's a little crowded, so instead of everybody walk around, they just kind of wrote them out here. And thanks, Kevin and Priyanka. But yeah, my students have the first one is have any countries take on a national level take any action against ESG like some of the states have here in the U.S.?
Well, it's interesting what we're seeing on a national level. So the most extreme case is Sri Lanka. And here, what happened there, and you might have seen, the riots that toppled the government in Sri Lanka violently. That was a result of them basically implementing some of the food directives coming out of the World Economic Forum under the ESG umbrella. So they banned the import of synthetic fertilizers, which are a derivative of natural gas, a fossil fuel. And they immediately found that their yields went down so much that the country started to slip into famine. So they were, I guess, living close enough to the margin that implementing these policies took them into the direction of starvation, and they pretty much ran the government out of the country. But on a more peaceful scale, we saw governments in Italy become conservative. We saw governments in Sweden become conservative over the past year, over a lot of factors, but primarily due to these sort of ESG concepts. So it is starting to happen on a smaller scale. I don't think the U.S. is there yet. The midterms pretty much was a vote for the status quo, but we'll see what comes up in the presidential election. But we are starting to see the effects of this, with inflation, with fuel, not only at the gas pump, but heating your home becoming more unaffordable throughout the West. We're seeing food become more unaffordable. We're seeing things start to disappear from shelves. So, at some point, even here in the U.S., it's possible that people start to get a little fed up.
Okay. And then, see, the next one is cryptocurrency any kind of safe haven against some of this ESG stuff where they're going to, especially like I think the England was talking about doing, programmable currency and all based on this ESG stuff?
Yeah, I don't think crypto is going to be the savior that they hoped it would be. Currency is a number of things, but one of the things that it's supposed to be is a store of value, something that we can hold, and it's going to have the same value in a year or 10 years. And what we're seeing as a result of a lot of these ESG policies, in terms of creating shortages of basic things like food and fuel, but also in terms of the expenditures on renewables and all this, it's been hugely inflationary across the world. And so people are looking for a safe haven. Where can we go to preserve our savings and to save for the future? And so crypto has really been a beneficiary of that in theory. Unfortunately, with FTX and things like that, it hasn't proved to be all that safe a venture. And, I think that it's going to be ultimately regulated enough and probably controlled enough that it won't act as an alternative to the dollar. So people are thinking about buying gold, and they're thinking about investing in commodities, and that's all well and good too, but those are very, very volatile assets. So what you're left with now is, fortunately, you can buy fixed income, and that even you can buy CDs or money market, very liquid, very safe investments, and they're now yielding more than 4 to 5, 4.5%, something like that. So people are trying to find these kind of safe havens. I'm not sure cryptocurrency is going to fulfill that, although that was the intention when they started out with it. We might have lost that connection. Did we lose the connection?
Are you still there, Greg? Okay, until we get him back, we can actually take questions from University of Central Florida. You want to test out your mic?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Oh, wow, we can hear. So I have a question. So I'm actually an accounting student, and I'm seeing this being taught in my classes. So I found your film really interesting. So I was wondering, how can we ensure that this isn't being promoted in the universities?
It's a great question. That is one of the most difficult things. I think the universities are promoting this everywhere, and it's very, very hard to escape it. I think really the best that students can do is independent research and independent thought. Question whether this makes sense as an ideology. For me, I don't claim to be an expert on climate change, and that wasn't the question that I asked with the documentary. The question is, even if we want to pursue these goals of reducing emissions and racial equity and all these things, which are good goals, is this sort of system the best way to go about it? Is this sort of collaboration between government and industry, pushing these ideologies from above on decisions that are made in Davos and taking the vote away and the conversations away from ordinary citizens? Is this really the best way to find and implement solutions? And so that's a question that I think students should really be asking as they get ready to go out into the working world. But to have those conversations with professors, I've been out of university for a little while. I think the world has changed since I was there. I imagine that's very difficult today. So I think a lot of this requires students that want to think for themselves and that want to do their own research and their own thinking. And I think that must be very difficult to be a student today and do that.
So Sarah here had a question, and she wanted to know, why did you decide to make this movie?
Well, because we're losing our voice as Americans. We're losing our voice as voters. So these issues are so big that they should be decided in the public forum. The Supreme Court ruled recently on something called the Major Questions Doctrine. And this was a rebuke to a lot of the federal agencies, but they said on major questions, important questions to our lives, those have to be decided, legislated in Congress and in state legislatures. Those can't be decided by federal agencies, for example. So we're losing our voice on these major questions, on climate, because it affects us. Not only does climate change affect us, but all these policies to address it affect us. And we should be able to have a voice in this. We should be able to also have a voice as consumers. So, for example, we should be able to have a voice in what sort of cars we're going to buy versus being forced to switch to EVs. When we think about the energy transition, it's portrayed as a transition from dirty fossil fuels to clean energy, whether that's wind and solar or whatever. But you're never told the fact that all the minerals for wind and solar and EVs get mined in places like Africa. You have to strip mine them under horrible working conditions, child labor and slavery. And just to give you an example, to make one EV battery for one average sized electric vehicle, you must move about 250 tons of earth to get to all of the minerals that you need. Then you have to transport another 50 tons of earth over to China, where it gets refined and processed using generally coal-based energy, and then it comes back and gets assembled into the US. So we should be able to make a choice. Do we want to extract liquid fuels, fossil fuels from the earth to power our society, or do we want to strip mine the earth and do all the economic devastation that comes with that, and the pollution of rivers and the displacement of people? Not to mention, when we build these solar farms, they take up tons of acreage, displacement of wildlife. And when we build these windmills out in the ocean or wherever, they have their hazards to birds and whales and everything else. So these are decisions that we should be able to make. And so that's why I made the documentary. The other way that we're losing our voice is in censorship. The way that social media is now censoring views on behalf of the government to silence people who don't agree with the ESG movement. So that's a very long answer to your question, and I apologize for that. But it occurred to me that Americans are losing and have lost our voice in all of these important issues, and we should be part of the conversation.
So I have a follow-up question, because you were talking about consumers. I find it difficult as a consumer to be able to make choices between certain things because of the companies that we have. Like, it seems that we have very limited options, sometimes because of the way the companies back certain things, especially the way the administration's leaning towards pushing like EVs, and they're trying to even get rid of fossil fuel powered cars. So what would your advice be for consumers trying to make better decisions and trying to put their money where?
Yes, I mean, thank you for that question. And you're right. It is so difficult. You just want to kind of live your life and go to the grocery store and buy things that you want and drink things that you want and drive cars that you want to have. And it's so difficult to have to go and research what's the company's position on XYZ. So I don't have a great answer to that question. Some people, as I said, you can look at something like when you open bank accounts, look at community banks versus the big Wall Street banks. Some people just find the messaging off-putting, and they find that they've kind of lost their relationship with their favorite brands, whether that's Coca-Cola. Some people have been put off by sports because of the positions that, Major League Baseball or, basketball or football have taken, and they just don't enjoy the sports as much as they used to being preached at. But, it does require a little research. It requires, a little bit of awareness, and you don't have a ton of choices. You can't necessarily find an auto company that is neutral. It's very difficult to find a media company that's neutral or a beverage company that's neutral. So I think it's a matter of working as shareholders, as voters, as lawmakers and as citizens, to get people into government that are going to encourage companies and to support shareholder movements that are going to encourage companies. Just do your business, stay out of the politics, make great products, do serve the shareholders, serve the customers, and just leave the other stuff aside. And I'm sorry, I wish I had a better answer for you than that. That's where we are at the moment, and hopefully there will be more options in the future. I will say one thing to take note of: if anyone has entrepreneurial interests, there's an enormous opportunity here to serve all of the people that are being alienated by all of these companies. And a lot of companies are now stepping up to do this. There's a company called Patriot Mobile that now provides alternative mobile phone service at a very reasonable rate. They access all the other companies' cell towers, so you can pretty much use any other provider's cell towers. And they are not part of the ESG movement. There are publishing companies. It's mostly kids' books that I'm aware of because I'm a parent, but things like Tuttle Twins and even like the Daily Wire is producing content for kids. So there's a lot of companies that are now stepping up. There are people starting companies, and they are making eGuard watches is another one, and they are making a ton of money serving all the people that are alienated by ESG influenced corporations.
Thank you. That was all the questions we had.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your questions.
Okay, sorry about that. We don't have an Ethernet connection in the room, so we are on the Wi-Fi, and I get really it failed just like y'all said it would. But the last question was actually there was some applause that came about whenever our very own Attorney General here in Louisiana came up on your documentary. We all love what Jeff Landry. You may or may not know he's running for governor right now.
Oh, I didn't know. Okay.
Yes. So he's the favorite. He's being endorsed fairly regularly. We expect he'll probably end up winning. But the ESG bill that was passed here in Louisiana, how good was it, or are there some improvements that we can look forward to pushing AG Landry to get passed should he get elected?
Yeah, it's difficult. And he has certainly been very, very activist, very brave, I would say, in bringing this lawsuit against the Biden administration for collaborating with corporations to silence people. So we were happy to get his input on the subject. There's some variety in things that states are doing. Certainly Texas, West Virginia, all have their versions of this. The challenge that states are going to face in doing this is that so many Wall Street banks are on board, and certainly all of the big asset managers are on board with the ESG movement. And so to boycott them, again, is very brave, and they're defending important industries in the state and jobs in the state in doing this. But there could be a penalty in terms of when you want to issue bonds or other banking services, that it gets a lot more expensive when you take the big Wall Street banks out of the picture. So there can be some short-term pain in doing this. I do feel, though, that if enough conservative states start to join together and do this, you will see these financial institutions start to take notice. And in fact, you are seeing that. I listened into a Texas State Senate hearing where they invited State Street and BlackRock to testify where they are on ESG. And it was amazing to hear them. They testify, we would never do that. We love fossil fuel companies and we would never do anything against them, certainly not. And they were challenged, what's on your website? What about these statements by Larry Fink, et cetera? So it's interesting to watch them when they get challenged, how they backpedal. And once a lot of the things that they're doing come to light, they immediately start to shift gears a little bit. So, I can't speak to specific elements of Louisiana's legislation, but I think anything that states can do to bring to light what these Wall Street banks and asset managers are doing against the industries that are vital to the state and vital to people's jobs and livelihoods, that I think will go a long way.
That was our last question, but we appreciate your time.
Thanks for watching the film, and thanks for your questions.
Okay, great. Kevin, do you have any final remarks before we say goodbye to these amazing students?
Yeah, well, just one point that I would like to make is that there's a fundamental disagreement, I guess, between conservatives and progressives on this issue. What we've kind of grown up, the system that we've grown up with, fundamentally believes that the government exists to defend our rights. That is the purpose of government. That is why the US government was created, and that is enshrined in our Constitution. The fundamental purpose of government is to protect our rights as enshrined in the Bill of Rights and throughout the Constitution. Right to free speech, assembly, right to worship how we want, right to make our own decisions about our property and labor and everything else. The progressive side, which is really the ESG movement, believes that government exists to achieve goals. And those goals are always changing. Initially, they were things like socialism and economic equality. And more recently, we're seeing those goals shifting to now becoming climate change and racial equity and things like this. But the belief is that government should be a matter of experts, whether they gather in Davos or the UN or in government agencies, and they should make decisions because they are the most informed and the wisest among us. And the role of government is to enforce those decisions and compel us as citizens to go along with that. And that is the fundamental disagreement on the role of government that's in front of us with this movement. And those are the decisions that we're going to make as a society, whether we support these movements or whether we want to support our government as it was established and as we've grown up with it and as we've known it. So I hope everybody will keep in mind that fundamentally that's really what this is about.